When you've been in the music business for over 50 years, it can be difficult to pick out some of the biggest moments from your career. But for Gary Van Scyoc, playing alongside John Lennon at Madison Square Garden takes the cake. As the bass player for the Elephants Memory Band, Gary spent countless hours in the studio alongside John as they recorded music and rehearsed for the one-to-one concerts in the early 70s. Over the years, he's worked alongside many major rock and roll names like Chuck Berry, Mick Jagger, Stevie Wonder, and Paul Simon, and continues to share his knowledge and experience with fans to this day. In light of the John Lennon Power to the People box set release and the one-to-one film, I sat down with Gary to get the details on all that went down behind the scenes and hear more about his music origin story. So let's get into it. Hi Gary, thanks so much for being here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Skylar?
I'm doing fabulous. I know that we recently just saw each other because of the one-to-one listening party, because that whole big box set just came out. I know we're all celebrating it, and you especially, because you were part of Elephants Memory Band, a very iconic group. You got to share the stage with some incredible legends. But before going into that and before discussing the concerts in general, I kind of want to start right at the beginning with you getting into music, discovering your talents. How did it all come together? No pun intended.
Ah, good one.
Caught myself with that.
Well, I had a heart problem when I was young and wasn't able to do sports, so there wasn't really a lot of choices. So, it all came to a head in high school. I had a high school band director that was a bass player of all things, and took me under his wing and took me to some of his gigs. And I was hooked. I had a great teacher, and he lended a lot of great experience that he had in the music business to me. So I kind of knew what I was getting into. It wasn't a total shock for some of the things that come up in the record business. That was in 1964, long before you were born. I was a senior in high school and went to a music school in West Virginia called Salem College, and also studied a little bit at West Virginia University. I had a hit record out of the blue. I was with the band at college, and had a hit record in Billboard and Cashbox called The Fife Piper in 1966 with my band, and it became top 10 on Cashboard and Billboard. So I got a nice little introduction into the music business. I was signed with Hanna-Barbera Records. They're the Flintstone people, and so I got a lot of my music put on the Flintstones and the Jetsons and all those TV shows in the mid-60s. But that was all in Pittsburgh, so I got the bug and decided to come to New York in 1967. Had a couple of successful bands, one on Columbia Records called Pig Iron. They had a hit record and a hit album on Columbia Records. And so it was during that time that I was working with the famous artist Paul Simon, doing some recordings for him at Columbia. And one day I mentioned to Paul that there was a band that I kept seeing in the Village Voice called Elephants Memory that were looking for a bass player. And he says, "Oh, I saw them last year in the park. They're very good. You should go down and audition." And I did, and got the gigs.
It seems like everything kind of fell into place so easily back then, in terms of music and people wanting to come onto the scene. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, the scene was wide open, but again, very small, though. There weren't 1,000 bass players looking to do sessions and stuff in those days. It was a small little group. You kind of had to have somebody in your corner. So I had been working for Atlantic Records at the famous Hit Factory studio. A friend of mine owned it, Jerry Ragavoy. He wrote a couple of great hits, one for Janis Joplin called Another Piece of My Heart. And he also wrote Time Is on My Side by the Rolling Stones. So he had a lot of success, and he loved my playing and kind of got me into the Union in New York City, Local 802, which you kind of have to be a part of back in those days. So I had a great recommendation and got a lot of studio work. My typical day would be getting up in the morning and doing an Uncle Ben's rice commercial, or in the afternoon, something like Roto Rooter or something crazy like that. And then later on, go to a session that evening. Most of the records were done in the evenings at the record plant or the Hit Factory, those famous studios in those days. I'm talking like 1972. I hadn't been with John too long before all that started.
So you got the gig with Elephant's Memory. You eventually began to start working with John, but prior to all of that, what kind of influence did his music have on your life? You know, whether it was Beatles, whether it was solo, and then what kind of led you to eventually starting to record with him?
Well, I was a huge Beatle fan. They hit when I was a senior in high school. So I remember riding around on lunch breaks and trying to find Beatle music on the radio. Wasn't too hard. But I was a huge Paul fan because I was a bass player. So I was really into Paul. Didn't really care too much for John. I was so zoned in on all of Paul's bass lines and that kind of stuff. Didn't really think about John or God knows working with John. I mean, it never crossed my mind, but it's just the way it worked out. I got to New York, got with Elephant's Memory, and I was only in Elephant's Memory about 9 months before uh, they got the call that he might be interested through our mutual friend Jerry Rubin, who was the political activist at that time. Shared a tape that we had made with John. Everyone knows the story, I guess. He just showed up at our rehearsal one night, and it was just an amazing chain of events that went in our favor, and hopefully, I like to think his favor as well. We hit it off pretty good and made a couple of nice records for sure.
That's an understatement for sure. To say a few nice ones. I would say you worked fabulously together, just even from when I saw the documentary back in the spring and then getting to hear it in this remastered quality. It all sounds fantastic. And obviously, you guys are most known for recording sometime in New York City with them and also playing with them at the one-to-one concert, which we are celebrating this year. But what would a typical day of rehearsals look like with John in the studio?
He was very focused. I mean, you would come into rehearsal. Well, there were no rehearsals for the recording sessions. The recording sessions were no rehearsals. You showed up at 6 o'clock in the evening at the record plant, and you would never have heard the song before. And he would introduce the song to two or three of us while they were getting drum sounds. And by 7 o'clock, you were pretty much expected to have a part in mind and start laying down tracks. We all had the advantage of being studio musicians and had done a lot of recording on our own and as a band. Maybe people probably don't remember, but Elephant's Memory was the got an Academy Award for the soundtrack for Midnight Cowboy, the famous movie hit movie with Dustin Hoffman. That was 1969. So that's one of the things that got me interested in the record, The Elephants. When I went down to audition, was I saw their gold record on the wall for Midnight Cowboy. So that definitely piqued my interest. I went, wow, I like the way that looks on the wall.
What would be Is there a behind the scenes story from recording with John that you haven't told anyone, or one that's a little bit lesser known than others?
The story with John, well, I think it's all funny stuff you remember, like
Yeah.
him asking us and Yoko asking us to go to Chinatown one night. And I think we ordered every drink known to man on the menu and every entree as well, and ran up a huge bill. It must have been a couple of grand. And nobody had any money because in our band, because you just expected John to pay. And about midnight, 1 in the morning, we realized that John and Yoko didn't have any money. Bob Gruen tells this story much better than I, but it was pretty much a panic mode for about 2 or 3 minutes. And I'll never forget the look on the owner's face when he was actually contemplating that he might not get paid. Uh, he had already sent all the people in the restaurant home, all the waitresses and waiters. So it was, I think they had to send Yoko's assistant Peter up to the Dakota to retrieve some money to get and come and bail us out.
You had to be there for it. I mean, if that's how the story turned out, then that would have been, I think, even funnier.
Yeah.
But just the idea, did that happen more than once, or was that just kind of like that one off?
No, that was a one-off. Usually we ate in the studio. Yoko would order out Japanese food or something. That was a rare occasion. I think where there was something going down at the studio, they were having trouble getting the tape machines aligned or something, and we just said, "Screw it, we're going for food," and we just jumped some cabs and went down there. I think that's the only time that happened, but it was just funny that they weren't quite prepared to pay for the whole evening. Bob Gruen has a great picture that I've seen of that evening. It is documented. I think our party was about the band, John and Yoko. I think May Pang was there, Peter. There might have been a dozen of us. It was just a great night. I'll never forget it.
Would you say he preferred being in the studio and being in that professional mode and getting the music recorded, or did he prefer those more casual moments where you guys were all just kind of hanging out and bonding and getting to know each other?
Oh, those bonding moments were the best, you know. I mean, we went on to record our album a couple weeks later. I think we by then we had the Elephant's Memory self-titled LP on Apple. When we got into our album a couple weeks later, I guess that would be somewhere in the end of March on 72. We had already spent 2 or 3 weeks with the Lennons, and we're very relaxed, having a lot of fun. A lot of people would come down and visit at the studio. Kennedy Onassis and Rudolph Nureyev, the famous ballet dancer. There was just a procession of people at the record plant. It was never a dull moment. You know, the Secret Service was there protecting Jackie Onassis, and it was a wild scene every night.
You guys were starting to get closer for gearing up for the one-to-one gigs. You knew that the crowd was going to be in for a treat because, as I've learned recently, everyone was going in and expecting to hear John singing old Beatles songs or anything in that regard. And it's obviously that's not what ended up being included on the set list. So from your perspective as a band member, how were the shows received by the public at the time?
Well, I had 2 shows at the Garden. That was in the one afternoon, one evening. That was I had never done a double before with a concert band. I've done a lot of doubles with for other occasions, but that was quite a stretch to do 2 shows. I think there were 25,000 people in the afternoon and 25,000 in the evening. So it was a long day. I was amazed at how John could get through that, singing songs like Mother. And I mean, he really just spent his voice in the afternoon. I was amazed he could even do a second show. When I mentioned to Sean at the premiere of the One-to-One movie back in April, that his father was a little hoarse that day, had a little bit of a cold. He was amazed that his father could sing those 2 sets, not being in the best of voice, but you would never know it. I mean, it was just his voice was flawless, in my opinion. He sounded tremendous. And the things that Sean has done with the recording since that, to after they transferred it and redid the whole thing, it's even better somehow. I don't know how that's possible, but he just did a lot of magic with those tracks. That's for sure. It sounded tremendous.
How did you hear anything from the audiences, like any of the crowd members afterwards about what they thought of the show? Were they thinking the same? Were they kind of thinking, what is this? This is nothing we've ever heard before?
Well, I didn't get that kind of reaction. I think I had maybe 10 personal friends there, like in the fourth or fifth rows. I was excited to actually see them on the picture in the box set where they have the picture of the whole audience, and I could spot my friends right off the bat. I couldn't wait to call them and tell them that they made the box set. And so I'm sure that's another 5 or 6 sales that they made, because I'm sure they are all running out to get it, of course.
That was the crowd's reaction. How would you say that the shows were received by everyone else who was in the band or anyone who was part of putting all of the concerts together? How would you say that they reacted to the final product?
Well, I don't have a lot of my band members to compare it with, because I only have one band member, Adam, left out of the Elephant Memory Group. So I think Adam really liked it and appreciated it. There was some controversy earlier on in the 80s about those first mixes and the videos of that. But I think Adam has come around and has made peace with the whole thing, and we've come a long way, and we're both very happy with it. Some of the press didn't, it was panned by a lot of the press really at the time, maybe because of the reasons that you're mentioning, that it didn't have a lot of Beatles songs, and for various other reasons probably. John and Yoko were very disappointed in a lot of the press's reaction to the show. Then there were the obvious reasons that a lot of people didn't like a lot of the political nature of the one-to-one, not the one-to-one, but the Sometime in New York City record. One song on there particularly that we know that's having a lot of controversy because it's not included on the box set. But I'm just thankful that the box set is out, and after all this time, we had a false alarm a couple of years ago that I thought maybe when it didn't happen, after we had heard it was going to be released, that it might just fall apart and by the wayside and never come out. So I'm really thankful that Sean has stuck with this and got it out in the form that it's in now. And it just couldn't sound any better. I don't think he would have been able to get it sounding like it does right now. It's not an easy feat going back to the original 2 tracks and the multi-tracks and getting them transferred. And but the advantage is you have all the computerized stuff that's going on now with digital. You can do a lot of things you would never have been able to do maybe even 10 years ago. So, it keeps advancing all the technology. So I think that's a real advantage for this product.
With the sound quality at the shows when you were there at the time, because the new remasters sound fantastic, as you're saying, and as I'm agreeing, because hearing it in Dolby blew me out of the water. But at the time, what did it sound like being on stage as you were performing it? Was it difficult to work with? Because obviously the equipment and setup and everything was different at the time than what it would be now.
Yeah, well, amps are amps, and I think I went out and bought every bass amp known to man, so I had a really good setup there. I think a couple of friends and musician friends of mine said it was the loudest concert they've ever heard. Yeah, the equipment that John had purchased for us for what he thought was going to be a tour was off the charts. I mean, it was old vintage amps, Fender amps and stuff that were just the best that you could possibly buy. We were geared up. I mean, we had all the right gear, and I just remember the stage kind of shaking when we started playing. I mean, it was very powerful.
Do you remember anything that John said, as kind of words of inspiration from that night that he said to any of the band members directly?
No, John wasn't like that. He kind of gave you your space and expected us as professionals to do our job. And, little things like giving us a whole bunch of money to go out and buy custom clothes was kind of cool. I guess he wanted us to look good. So everybody went down to this place. I think I mentioned it the other night at the screening that He gave us a budget, and we went down to a very famous, at the time, famous clothes store, handmade clothing in Greenwich Village. It was called Jenny's Water Bags. I don't know what that's about, but they were the best. They did all the stars in that day with custom clothes. And so I had a black satin suit made that was, I still have it, actually. Somebody asked me, the moderator the other night asked me if I still had the suit, and I had to say it's in a clothes bag in the closet. I still have it. I don't know whether I could fit into it or not, but everybody was decked out, and then John shows up in an army shirt, so go figure.
That's the irony. That is John Lennon to a T. Just one of many examples.
That was a perfect example of John. John made a lot of funny comments during the night. We would kid him about getting the lyrics correct to come together, which he finally relented and allowed us to do. He wouldn't do a Beatles song, and we coaxed and coaxed and coaxed. And finally, about a week before the concert, we were rehearsing at the Fillmore East in New York, and I came into rehearsal early one day, and they were playing Come Together, and I was just amazed that he actually agreed to do that. Very exciting. But then at the show, he screwed up the lyrics again, which he always does. And I don't know, hairy eyeball or something. I don't know. Yeah, he had everything.
Something like that.
And I think he made a comment during the show. He had to stop writing and singing those daft lyrics. He had it all over the place. And so it was stuff like that, because John thought it was a rehearsal, really. I mean, he wanted it to be a great performance, of course, for the show and for the Willowbrook kids. But I think he makes a comment during the show that it was welcome to the rehearsal, because we were just thinking about it as a really good dress rehearsal for the tour to follow. So unfortunately, because of the green card situation and his immigration status, we just never got it off the ground, unfortunately.
You've released your own solo work and you've recorded with additional groups outside of Elephant's Memory. So as a singer and songwriter yourself, where do you try to get your inspiration? Who do you look up to? Who have you looked up to all of these years?
Well, after working with John in the studio, I'd have to say John, because he taught me so much about the recording process. I mean, I had done dozens of records before that, but not as a producer and not as an artist. I had just worked as a bass player and a session player, doing jingles and various other artists as a bass player. Paul Simon, Neil Sedaka, you might know him as a classic. He's still around. Loved working with Neil Sedaka. He was phenomenal. I learned a lot about vocalizing from him as well. But John would be my main influence, and John taught me about making a record. You had to really stay in the board or stay in the record. And as he said, he would very rarely get up from the board, and just kept his attention on the record and the board the whole session. He would very rarely get up for any food breaks or pee breaks or whatever. So I learned that from John. As a producer, you really just can't take an hour break. You really have to, there's always something to do. There's always something to put your mind to. If it's not taking vocalists aside and rehearsing background vocals, or going into the studio and checking on the drum sound. Sometimes you go into the room and the drums sound different than you're hearing them through in the control room. So you kind of have to keep a constant check on that. Make sure nobody's knocked over any microphones, this and that. Just the little minutia of how to run a session as a producer. He couldn't have been a better guy to use as a reference, because he was totally involved in every second of the evening. It was amazing to me. So that really helped me later on when I was doing my own records and other people's records for that matter. He was a great guide.
John seems like he was very locked in studio sessions. That's what my generation would say about him.
Oh yeah, yeah,
We'd have that.
yeah. He was totally locked in, and I think it was just a great advantage of ours to be able to hang with them like that, and it helped on all of our following records after that. I mean, after our record deal with Apple, and we had went on to another record deal with RCA and one with Polydor Ltd in Europe, and when we got over to Europe to record our next couple of albums, I think we were just a better band and tighter and more organized with all of our parts and our songwriting, our arranging. Everything got better because of our time with John.
Now, you mentioned working with John, you've mentioned working with Neil Sedaka, and I know that you have an incredible list of other artists that you've worked with. When you have a large roster such as that, what makes each one of them stand out amongst the rest? What are some, certain experiences that are a highlight for you with each of them?
I was fortunate enough to work with Jerry Ragavoy at the Hit Factory, as I mentioned earlier, and he produced a long list of R&B artists on Atlantic, one of which was Howard Tate. And I think Rolling Stone called him one of the top 10 R&B singers of the 60s. So I'm dating myself a little bit here, but I had heard Howard Tate records, and I was just thrilled to work with him as much as I was with John, because R&B was kind of my main thing, because I was from Pittsburgh, an R&B town. And so my work with Howard Tate is probably one of my highlights besides John. I'd have to always put John at number one. You can't beat playing with the Beatle. But if you wanted to take the R&B style, and of course they have their own R&B charts in Billboard and Cashbox, it's kind of a separate little thing. So to be a hit on the R&B charts was a real personal thrill for me. Because the record we did with John was panned and really didn't do that well on the charts. So this was 1972 I'm talking about. And so I was thrilled to have that success with Howard Tate. I didn't really do any records with Paul Simon. I only did, we were both on the same label. My band Pig Iron, previous to Elephants, was on Columbia, as Paul was on Columbia. So I met Paul there and did a songwriting class with Paul. He asked me to do a songwriting class. In 72, Paul Simon was kind of having a lull in his career. And for some reason, he did a songwriting class for NYU at Columbia Records. And I was asked to do the sessions for all of the students in his songwriting class. So that was a wide dichotomy of styles, and it was just an amazing time with Paul. And he's the one that recommended I go down and audition for the Elephants, so I have a lot to thank him for as well. But you're right, a lot of artists, a lot of jingles, but nothing could top working with John.
Definitely. I don't know how that's even you say that about John, nothing's gonna top playing with a Beatle, and then it's like for me, with the Beatles, I'm going to come across so many music artists that I'm going to fall in love with their sound, and everyone's going to say, oh, are they your new favorite band? And the answer is always no. The Beatles are always at the top. Even if I don't talk about them, every waking moment of the day, nothing's going to beat their music, because they've changed my life in too many ways.
Skylar, I mean, we have, 50 years difference in our age. It's just amazing. Thank you for having the interest in the Beatles, and your interest is amazing to me, to keep the legacy of the Beatles alive.
It's good that, younger fans like myself are getting into the Beatles. We're continuing to spread that legacy and their wisdom that they were trying to put out into the world. So what words of wisdom would you say that you have for budding musicians? How can they try to achieve it all, or try to achieve any dream that they have?
Geez, I guess it's with all the things that have happened in the music business, and is there really a record business? I don't even know. You got to sell records out of the trunk of your car now. And I mean, it's just so screwed up, the whole thing, compared to what it was in my day. The only thing I would say is you have to really, and in this day and age, I'm sure it's even more true, you have to really be a killer on your instrument and really learn your craft, because otherwise I don't know how you would stand a chance in today's climate. I mean, it's just unreal. You have to record your own songs, do your own record. You got to have it pressed yourself, sell it out of the trunk of your car, and hope you get somebody to hire you on a tour that you can take your career to further dimensions. I don't know. It'd be really hard. I would really be depressed if I thought I had to start from scratch today. It would be very intimidating. So my hat's off to all the young people. But my only advice is really learn your instrument and become the best musician you can, because you're going to need it in this day and age. That's for sure.
Thank you so much for coming on, Gary. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for sharing your stories, your insights, all of it.
And thanks again for your spreading the Beatles word to all your people out there. And we really appreciate it. Thanks from the Elephants, and Eva says along.
Thank you.